When I talk to a lot of parents and when I talk to a lot of kids my age, one of the consistent things that I find to be true of kids who are really well adjusted is that they have made a lot of really stupid mistakes and they have learned from them. And those who haven't done that are oftentimes not in a good place. I've noticed that a lot of the kids who are still stuck in the trans identity haven't made a lot of really stupid mistakes and learned from them. And that actually, and this is a very counterintuitive and scary thing, that I think if the parents give the kid the ability to go and make a really stupid mistake and go learn the hard way, that kid will say, well, maybe there are more important things in life than my gender identity. And so this is why I encourage parents to take their kids on adventures.
You must be some kind of therapist.
Today my guest is Simon Amaya Price. He is a 21-year-old desister, writer, and speaker fighting gender ideology. Simon came out as transgender at 14, but desisted after 3 years. He's now the outreach and events lead at the LGBT Courage Coalition and a senior fellow at Do No Harm. Simon, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm really glad that we finally get a chance to speak. I think your story is very telling about a particular cultural moment as you've been emerging into the scene, getting out there and talking to people about gender ideology. I think it's easy to recognize a very bright young man capable of critical thinking. And I know many parents look up to you and appreciate your eloquent perspective on things. So today I want to gain perspective into what it's like to be 21 growing up in this era.
For me right now, being 21 is a little bit scary. And I think that's felt by a lot of my age peers, because right now we're kind of coming out of, hopefully, this period where we had what I see to be a pretty totalitarian ideology, which is still in the schools, still in the universities, still in the media to a certain extent, which hopefully appears to be on its way out. But then again, look, the next president could be a Democrat, and the Democrats could still be digging their heels in, and things could get worse all of a sudden again. So there's that. And then secondly, you have, I think we're in a period of civil strife as a country where, especially, I would trace it back to the Mangione shooting, which was like 2 years ago now, about. And then that kind of, started this trend of increasing political violence. I think really kind of culminating more recently in the assassination of Charlie Kirk, who many in my generation looked up to, impacted a lot of young guys, especially. And he was, for a lot of guys, kind of a sense of stability, a voice of reason, in a similar way to Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson actually has been going through some health issues, so he's been a bit absent from the scene. So young men of my generation don't really have great role models to look up to right now in the public eye. And then also, one of the issues is the way we were all raised. Generally speaking, we were raised to be fragile. I'm sure you've read the Coddling of the American Mind, but all of these moral busybodies running every bit of our lives through college and high school and middle school and elementary school, saying, well, you can't do that because you might get hurt or you might hurt somebody's feelings. And if you do that with kids, and a lot of parents do that, mine luckily did not do that as much as others. If you do that for an entire kid's life, that kid is going to grow up to be very fragile and unable to deal with uncertainty and the chaos we now find ourselves in. So we're kind of in a very strange moment as a generation.
I'm glad you brought up Charlie Kirk. I've been wanting to set the intention of speaking a few words about him in every interview since the assassination. And I was thinking, as I was getting ready for our conversation, I was wondering what kind of impact he'd had on you. Because as I was listening to your conversation with Harrison Tinsley on his show, by the way, Harrison is a previous guest of this show, You were talking about this moment of finding male peers who were just more kinda normal, not so they weren't participating in the GSA, they were, let's say, right of far left, and you found it refreshing that for the first time in your young life, you had a group of friends you could just disagree with and not not get into identity politics or, the sort of histrionic unraveling that we see in political radicals. Do you feel like Charlie Kirk shaped the culture of groups of young men like that? Did he have an impact on your friend group?
Yes, absolutely. Um, that specific friend group you're talking about was a group of friends I had in my first year of college, which unfortunately didn't last very long because we all left. All of us either after that first year or in the second year, or even before that, because we were all ended up being sick one way or another of the, as you said, histrionic atmosphere of the this very very far left college we were at. Um, and then yeah, I think that yeah, Charlie Kirk was definitely did have an impact on this particular friend group. Um, and I'd say that now, especially working in the area I do, I have a lot of friends and colleagues who personally knew Charlie Kirk. And so obviously there was a direct impact right there. And I've watched his videos here and there, and definitely was impressed by his ability to disagree agreeably.
Looking back on what you've shared about your childhood and being in this particular cultural moment, I'll just recap some of the kind of bullet points for people who might not have heard your story before. So, in eighth grade, you came out to your parents as bisexual. And as we were talking about behind the scenes, this was not one of those stories that we hear about of I'm bisexual and a week later I'm pansexual and a week later I'm genderqueer and a week later I'm trans. It wasn't one of those. It wasn't fueled by the GSA propaganda. It was that you actually were discovering certain feelings to people of both sexes. So more kind of the what it meant to come out to one's parents as bisexual in 8th grade 20 years ago. So that seemed more normal. But then within a short period of time, you started identifying as trans. You had some of the same background factors that we see in a lot of cases. I think you had mentioned an autism diagnosis at some point. There was a history of bullying. And then there were there was a combination of being yourself sexually assaulted and also being accused of sexual assault. And before we started recording, you were mentioning, as I think most people are well aware by now, unfortunately, that many detransitioners and desisters have some kind of sexual assault history. But I think your perspective is particularly interesting as a young man because of that experience growing up of being sent this message that at any point any female could accuse you of sexual misconduct and leverage that to hurt you regardless of what her motivations might have been, and in some cases there were other social components to the problems. In your particular story, maybe we'll start there. Do you think that being accused of sexual misconduct fueled your trans identity or intensified it?
Yes. Um, because being accused of sexual misconduct is what happened to cause my friends all of a sudden not talking to me. I came into school one day and nobody was talking to me. I was like, "Hey, what did I do? Let me know what I did. I'll apologize if I did something wrong. We can move forward and fix things." And they were all like, "You know what you did," and I really didn't. And that I didn't understand that. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was autistic. I was diagnosed when I was 16 that summer. And so, yeah, this just knowing that I, as a man, could be accused of sexual assaults, and even the people I consider to be my friends, people who I thought would know me and have kind of would give that a grain of salt would believe that was shocking. And I looked around and I'm like, well, if I accused a woman of sexual assaults, nobody would take that seriously. And a couple weeks later, after or a week, maybe 2 weeks, I forgot exactly. Um, later, after my friends left me, I was sexually assaulted myself, and then I told people, and nobody believed me. And so I'm in this situation where, just from a kind of naive, rational perspective, one could say, well, if I were a woman, I wouldn't have been accused, and people would believe me, and I would get the help I need if, after having been. And so I think that was definitely a part of it, because when presented with this idea that one can become a woman, that adds more benefits, let's say, to that option.
Did your parents know about all this?
Not at the time, no.
How long until they found out?
I only told them about me being sexually assaulted, I think like a year or so ago. It took me a long time to come to terms with that. And they kind of knew immediately that all my friends had left me and that I was going through a tough time and that something wasn't going right. And then what precisely happened, and I'll spare the details out of privacy reasons. The person young woman who accused me, I didn't find out that that's what she had said until, when was it? I think it was a year later, or maybe it was actually when I reconnected with a friend who I went to the same high school with after I left. So it was much later that even I figured out what happened. So
Oh, wow. Oh,
yeah.
I don't think I'd realized that. But I wonder how much parents can learn from an experience like yours, because I think for every boy who is accused of some kind of misconduct from an early age, there are 10 boys watching.
Yeah.
There's a lesson that gets internalized there about how much power girls hold. And I can hear the feminists in the comment section now. And I wanna say that this isn't a black and white either or issue. As you pointed out very well in your interview with Harrison Tinsley, in this country, we have the legal principle of innocent until proven guilty, but that's not typically how things work socially. And it's also very hard, as you said to him, either to completely prove or to completely disprove something like sexual assault. So there are absolutely errors being made in both directions. Victims not being believed and not getting the justice and support they need, but also victims in the sense that you were a victim of being wrongfully accused simply because some young person who's just as naive. I mean, this girl, she was what, eighth grader like you?
Ninth grade.
Ninth grade. I mean, who of us made wise decisions in ninth
Yeah.
grade? And typically, if you're in ninth grade and you're looking to figure out how to achieve some status socially, and you learn, oh, this is a weapon I can wield, right? All I have to do is say this one thing, and now I get so much sympathy and support, and people rallying around me. And this person who I don't like for whatever reason, and it could be that I'm not even conscious of why I don't like them. It could be I'm angry at them because I feel rejected by them, but now I get to turn the tables of this power dynamic. Um, so I'd imagine that on some level, this is going on behind the scenes so much of the time, and it's just one of those factors that drives some boys to feel like it'd be more advantageous to be a girl.
Yeah. I also want to clarify my previous response, because I realize I misspoke. The sort of timeline of events, I very quickly after losing my friends, found out that's what the allegation was. I wasn't sure who it came from or the reason it happened, but I knew that was the allegation. It was not until much later that I figured out the reason for the allegation and who precisely spread it. Um, and it was, in fact, one of the reasons you listed was it was rejection. And I think um, that it's one of those situations where I don't think she really understood why she felt the way she felt. And this was, in the wake of the Me Too movement, where the approach and kind of balance between in the conversation around these issues between the two sexes had been shifted very far in favor of women, especially in a liberal state like Massachusetts, to the point where you're not even in the trust but verify field, let's say. And then, yeah, for guys, even if you haven't been falsely accused, seeing your friend, because every guy I've talked to has either been through it or had a friend who was falsely accused. And there are, I, I could give you a whole long list of people. And so one of the reasons that actually there's so much difficulty in the dating market right now for guys my age specifically is that we're afraid that, or I'm less afraid, but a lot of guys my age are afraid that if they go up to a girl in a bar and they say, "Hey, I think you're pretty. Can I buy you a drink?" That she will say, "You're sexually harassing me," or something like that. And that's a very powerful disincentive against having healthy relationships with people.
And I think about what young men are to do with that, right? So there's getting deeper into porn and isolation, the idea that an imaginary girlfriend is better than no girlfriend. And now we have this combination of porn and AI chatbots. So there's the sexual sort of facsimile on the one hand, and then there's the emotional, relational facsimile as well. Obviously, that's not what Charlie Kirk wanted for young men, right? That's not what That's not what virtuous young men are going to pursue. But I can imagine many of them feeling kind of frozen and without good options. What are you hearing from your friends about what they are doing with this?
Yeah, so I am not friends with a lot of guys my age right now, just because I'm at a very different place in my life than a lot of guys my age. But the guys who are a little bit older than me, who are my friends, um, one of them, my closest friend, who's a guy, he's just been focusing entirely on his work because he's getting results, and he's like, if somebody comes along, somebody comes along, but I'm not going to waste my time doing something which might make things worse for me in the end. I have another friend who has a girlfriend that he met, and this is a very attractive guy who ran track in college, and he's top 1%, let's say. And so he had no trouble. But if I think back to the guys I knew at Berkeley in undergrad, a lot of them were, well, there's the extra layer of their musicians, so that makes things interesting. But a lot of them had really given up. A lot of them, there are a whole bunch of different behaviors that emerge from this, and it's fascinating from kind of an anthropological point of view, where one of the things that happens is you have this group of guys who have figured out that, whoa, if I pretend to be as woke as the girls will like me because I'm the only guy who's as woke as I am. And there are these situations where I would know a guy, and all of a sudden he'd come in wearing like a keffiyeh and like all the pins and everything, and I'd think in my head, I wonder who he met. And So it's like that's one of the dynamics that happens, and that's not at all healthy or good. Um, and then there's also the, of course, retreating from society with the porn and AI chatbots, and I don't know if you saw, Musk's AI company Grok came out with, I think it's called Annie, which is a AI chatbot with a 3D model of a attractive anime style young woman, whose clothes you can take off. And I think that's not great for young men's mental health or development. So there's that too. And then there are a lot of guys who are more on the conservative side, who live in places that are not Massachusetts, who find other young conservative women, and they're actually doing pretty well, I must say. When I went to Charlie Kirk's funeral, I saw a lot of young men and young women who were getting along well and seemed to be adjusted and groomed and dressed well, which is the first time I had seen more than like 5 people my age who would fit that description in the same place. So yeah, there's definitely sort of a bifurcation in levels of success in my generation, where I would say that most of my generation is doing really, really terribly. And for those in my generation who are doing well, they're doing really, really well.
I can imagine the parents are eager for your advice. I know you've been doing more parent coaching lately, which is also my full-time job outside of this podcast as well. And, as I'm sure at times as a desister, you get framed as sort of one of the lucky ones, that escaped with your bodily integrity intact. And we could certainly have a conversation about the harms of social transition, what gets lost in that time. I don't know if you'd be interested in talking about that, but I'm also thinking about how prior to your desistance, there was probably a time that your parents were really scared about you going down a medical pathway. And I think that you'd said pretty early on after announcing a trans identity that you did want those medical interventions. So I can imagine the parents in the audience are very eager to hear what you think your parents did particularly well, what you think they could have done better, to prevent you from going down that path.
Yeah, this is always a bit of a loaded question, and the $1 million question, where if you get the answer to that, a lot of people will give you a lot of money. Uh, I would say I want to emphasize, first of all, that yeah, a lot of it was genuinely luck, 100%. A series of events happened. Kind of the way I am, I oftentimes, you put me in any room and I will be the one guy who disagrees, and that makes friends and also foes. And generally, foes with people you would not want to spend time around, and generally friends with people who I actually quite enjoy spending time around. Um, or would want to be like, is another way to put that. And then, yeah, so I think there are two things that my parents did really well. One is when I was 15 or 14, around my 15th birthday. I could probably look in my calendar and find the specific date, but anyways, I was in my pediatrician's office. I was explaining to my pediatrician that I was feeling gender dysphoria, and my dad wasn't affirming me and all these different sorts of things. And my pediatrician said in front of my dad, he asked my dad in front of me, "Would you like a dead son or a living daughter?" Now, my dad went apeshit on him, and that is the clinical term. Uh, and this doctor actually quit like a year later, and I like to think that we had something to do with it. So I tell that story because my parents set very clear boundaries of no, you're not medicalizing. And I was 14, 15 at the time, and that's a very reasonable thing to be doing. And I I think part of the thing is I didn't know it at the time, but there was a legitimate threat of DCF, Department of Children and Families, I think, in Massachusetts, actually taking me away from my parents because they refused to affirm me. I didn't know that at the time. It wasn't very well known, but that was the case, and my dad knew it, and that's very scary. So right, this might be a little bit different, and a lot of other people didn't know that because this was all the way back in like 2019, right before COVID. So right before literally the 3 times increase in transgender identification in my generation. And then the second thing they did really well is they gave me a pretty long leash. So they let me go to college 2 years early and live away from home and gallivant around and make a lot of really stupid mistakes. And actually, making a lot of really stupid mistakes is how you figure out who you are. And I think that, when I talk to a lot of parents and when I talk to a lot of kids my age, one of the consistent things that I find to be true of kids who are really well adjusted is that they have made a lot of really stupid mistakes and they have learned from them. And those who haven't done that are oftentimes not in a good place. And I've noticed that a lot of the kids who are still stuck in the trans identity haven't made a lot of really stupid mistakes and learned from them. And that actually, and it's a very counterintuitive and scary thing that I think that if the parents give the kid the ability to go and make a really stupid mistake and go learn the hard way, that kid will say, well, maybe there are more important things in life than my gender identity. And so this is why I encourage parents to take their kids on adventures. And I mean adventures in the most broad way. I'm like, you could go hiking, you could go camping, you could go to a third world country, because those are new, different situations that take you out of the context you're in. So there's some brain neuroplasticity going on there, and then there's also the level of that puts you in situations where you're more likely to make really stupid mistakes. And that could be anything from forgetting the lighter and having to find the right rocks to start a fire, or that could be um, deciding for some reason to live in a house with 8 women your age, um, which is, yes, a thing I have heard of a kid actually doing, which a young man doing who's trans identified, which is going to be interesting to see, hear about that.
I completely agree, and I'm glad to hear you talk about it. You mentioned Jonathan Haidt, and he has this saying of being overprotected in the real world and underprotected in the virtual world. And I talk a lot in my course and in my coaching about natural consequences. And it's true, a lot of the kids of the parents I talk to are pretty sheltered even from age appropriate responsibilities and natural consequences of their actions. And there's usually some kind of rationalization or many levels of rationalization piled up. It could be, well, he's working so hard in school, or she's doing all these extracurriculars. And so we want to make her life easier by not giving her any chores on top of that. And it's like, okay, but someday she's going to have to have a life in which she goes to work and the gym and walks the dog and like so we're trying to prepare kids for an adulthood in the real world, not a life of having things handed to them,
Yes.
right? And also when their lives are that easy, it also kind of puts their how do I put this? Their threshold for inconvenience is like it just
Yeah.
needs to be reset.
Yeah.
um And it's so tough when parents have spent years not allowing for those small mistakes and age appropriate responsibilities and natural consequences. When you avoid those for years, it just gets exponentially harder with time. And then you
Yep.
have this 18-year-old who's never experienced the consequences of any actions. I mean, not even like, if you forget to do your laundry on Sunday, you're not gonna have any clean underwear to wear to school on Monday. Like, your kids need to experience that level of inconvenience. They need to,
Yep.
just and that's also how life feels real to us, right? When we're dealing with material consequences, like being hot or being cold because you didn't think to dress appropriately or pack appropriately for the situation. I mean, just even those things in the body make things feel real, combined with knowing that you can survive, knowing that you can get through, like, I'm thinking about, our kids, and we definitely have one that absolutely has to learn from experience, and I recognize it because 'cause I'm the same sort of person. So, when his older brother tries to tell him, "Oh, don't do it this way, that doesn't work," I'm like, just let him figure it out for himself. He needs to learn it through his own hands and eyes, just like you learned it, right?" Um, and we try to give him natural consequences, and it's just like, we'll tell him, "Please don't please watch out around that stream," and we're on a hike, and, lo and behold, eventually his feet are wet, and then, he has to do the remaining 3 miles of the hike with wet shoes, and and, you know, through that experience, he's learning, 1, there are consequences to my actions, but 2, I can survive it, and it's my attitude that determines whether I'm still able to enjoy those 3 miles that I'm hiking with wet feet. And so it's a combination of things that builds, as I explain in my course, identity, confidence, and competence, which are really what so many of these kids are looking for.
Yeah. No, they're looking for something in a hard time they can hold on to. And looking for that, a lot of things can appear to fill that hole, or a lot of things can fill that hole suboptimally and cause other problems. Um, and the trans is one of those things. But I think the best thing is to be able to look back at your experience and say, right now is way easier than this thing that happened a couple years ago. And I got through that, so I'm going to be fine this time around. Um, yeah, but I think this is a very important thing to bring up. One of the things my mom, so I live in Boston, and the best I like to say that the best thing about Boston is complaining about Boston. And so in my family, at least, one of the ways, uh, and this is like a New England cultural thing, is one of the ways that we communicate and bond is complaining about things, which people in the South do not understand at all, I have discovered, and take it very personally when you complain about anything ever. Um, but my mom will say this thing where she'll say, "Hey, Simon, can you clean up the kitchen?" I'd be like, "Well, I have a call." And my mom says, "Well, I have a call too." And we've had conversations in the past where, my mom's kind of the main breadwinner of the household, and she she's like the head chief human resources officer at some biopharmaceutical company. And she at the same time is able to work out and sing flamenco and spend time with her husband and her kids. And whenever I complain about not having enough time to do something, she says, "Well, think about what it would be like to be me." And that's one of those things where I see how much she works and how hard she works, and there's a level of respect I've gained for that. And that's just a great way to have some perspective. And I think a lot of kids, maybe not the best way to communicate that to a kid, but a lot of kids need to understand that sort of thing. And then as well, my my parents haven't always been perfect about the natural consequences thing, but have gotten better over time. Like, for example, one of the things my parents did when I was younger is they would let me play outside unsupervised with friends, which is something that parents are horrified by now. And so I would go out and run around and do stupid things. And, I would wear boots without socks and get blisters on the back of my heels. And then, I haven't worn boots without socks since. And, I remember coming back and my dad said, I didn't say anything but I knew this would happen. And I said, well, why didn't you say anything? And he said, well, you needed to learn it from experience. And so all of these just like little things add up over time. And then secondly, the difference between an inconvenience, a challenge, and a trauma, this is going to be a very controversial statement, is how you look at it. One of the things that you see is different people in the same situation will find some things traumatic and others will not. And in every study I've read on the subject, the consistent thing that holds all the people together in the group who do not see the thing as traumatic is they see it not as something happening to them, but as a challenge to overcome. And a lot of kids are kind of being taught to be stuck in, either this thing is happening to me, which is true of trauma and true of inconvenience, to be fair, instead of looking at, this is how it is, and this is something I can, something to overcome. And you might not know how to overcome it, but that's, you figure it out. You take the first step, the smallest possible step that's doable right now towards it, and eventually you get to the end. And that's something when you first start it, you're scared. I was scared when I realized that at every new challenge, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this situation. But if you do it enough times, then you build that confidence, and you know that when you're confronted with chaos and uncertainty and everything going wrong, you're like, I don't know how I'm going to figure this out, but I know that I'm going to figure it out.
So I want to talk about the long leash double bind, because I think you have a really important point with the long leash. But some of the pushback I get from parents when we talk about allowing kids to experience natural consequences and practice asserting their independence is if the kid is already bought into the trans identity at this point, one of the fears that commonly comes up for parents is if I help them develop life skills, then they will use those skills to further their transition. So parents end up in this double bind where in some ways they are tempted to sabotage their kids' growth, right? They want to keep the kid dependent because it's like, well, if he still doesn't know how to make his own appointments and get himself there, then he won't be making gender affirming care appointments and getting himself there. So I'm just not going to teach him that skill, or I'm not going to leave him that, as you would call it, long leash. I'm curious how you would respond to that.
Yeah, so I've had parents tell me that and be worried about that. And it's like, I think in the specific example there, if you're in a situation where you can teach your kid, you have the option of teaching your kid how to make an appointment. You don't need to teach your kid how to make an appointment if you know they're about to use it to do that. I'm not going to recommend that. So with that caveat, I think that the general idea is completely backwards. The reason for that is a lot of transgender identification comes from the underdevelopment and lack of life skills. I would point at a couple in particular, and these are ones I particularly find to be consistent between trans-identified youth. It's a lot of social emotional skills. A lot of these kids are autistic, and a lot of them literally need a chart which says the name of an emotion, the generalized reason why you might be feeling that emotion, what that emotion tells you to do. And they need to practice sitting there and asking, what am I feeling? And then pinpointing the physical sensation of the feeling and trying to figure out, okay, I feel this. What is it telling me to do? Why am I feeling it? What's the name of the emotion? They need to practice that because they've been, even the ones who aren't autistic, they've been so dissociated looking at a phone or an iPad or a computer all day, every day, that they don't sit with themselves and learn how to have that ability to have that introception. It's like we have a whole generation who's suffering from alexithymia, or thymia rather. Themia would be cancer. Thymia is the difficulty of sensing one's own internal emotional state. So that's one of the life skills. That is a life skill. What happens with trans-identified kids is they can tell, oh, I feel bad, and they can tell, oh, I feel good. And when they do something that makes them feel good, they're going to keep doing the thing that makes them feel good, and vice versa. And do you know what feels good? Social affirmation. Do you know what feels good? Feeling like you have a plan for the future and steps to take. What feels bad in the moment is not having clear steps, not having social affirmation, and feeling you're all on your own trying to figure out the great mysteries of life. And so that's one of the things. I think another thing is that a lot of these kids, even if they're not autistic, really don't know how to socialize. And one of the simplest, kind of paradigms of looking at social interaction that I encourage parents and kids to learn is what I call match plus one, where basically, if you're having like, let's say you're in class, and your classmate says good morning to you. You started at 0 because he didn't say anything. Now he is at like level 1 of communication, and you say good morning back, so you're matching him. And then you say, how are you doing today? So you're adding another level. And then if he then says, I'm doing all right, how are you? Then he's matching you. Now, this kind of continues through conversations, and you can tell if somebody doesn't match you, they might not be interested in the conversation. Something else might be going on. They might be distracted, etc. But if they're matching you, or they're match plus one-ing you, that tells you that they're interested in the conversation and would like to continue having the conversation. And this generally works. And I remember I learned about this when I was like 16 or 17 for the first time. And I was like, wow, now I have an algorithm to kind of approach social interactions. And that made a really big immediate difference in my life, and allowed me to have friendships with people I wouldn't be able to have friendships with otherwise. And so a lot of my friendships as well led me to then have other perspectives and learn other things, and it has a snowball effect. And things happened, and eventually I desisted, but there was a lot of different things going on there. But yeah, life skills are the things that get you out of cults.
So it sounds like, to summarize your advice to parents in these situations, and I think I would agree with this, that yes, if there's a skill that really directly pertains to the steps they need to take to proceed with their medicalization wishes, maybe don't focus on those skills right now. But in general, we need to allow these kids and encourage them to have the experiences necessary to grow into full-fledged, confident human beings with problem-solving skills. And then I hear you describing some of the specific types of help that autistic kids need. And on that note, I hope this doesn't come across the wrong way, but you don't particularly come across as autistic. And I'm wondering, based on what you just described, if you feel like that's because you've always been at that, high functioning kind of, barely perceptible level, or if you feel like you've actively worked on these things that you're describing so that you are more fluid and natural in social interactions.
No, I've worked really, really hard for years on becoming kind of more fluid and natural in social situations. I mean, I was always high functioning, but I'm still a bit of a lecturer. I've been giving lectures since I was 6 years old. In middle school, they called me the white Neil deGrasse Tyson, because I gave people science facts even when they really didn't want to hear the science facts.
Okay. I mean, and so that gets at this, the way that affirmation has bled into everything, and now there's neurodiversity affirming care and things like this. And this Do you have something to say about that?
Oh, I have something to say about that. So I had a therapist, a conversation with a therapist, or a therapist in training. I think I forgot what thing she was in training for. Naomi Epps Best.
Oh,
You've
yeah,
probably
I had
talked to her.
asked you to connect me with her right before she blew up.
Yep.
We had some back and forth, but it didn't work out to get her on
Yeah.
the show. But yeah, please. And her, by the way, for anyone who's not heard her name before, just look her up, Naomi Epps Best. She's done some incredible whistleblowing on this
Yes.
current state of therapy training. Please go
Yeah,
ahead.
she was at Santa Clara University, which is, I think, nominally a Christian university, but not really in practice. I'm not a Christian, so who am I to judge? But
You might be more Christian than the Christian university.
So yeah, she asked me, is it that so she learned apparently that it was wrong to teach autistic people social skills because that was erasing their autisticness. And she asked me, is it appropriate to teach autistic people or autistic kids social skills? And I asked her, what the hell kind of question is that? Of course, that's what they need. And so this is part of like the kind of the woke-topus, if you will, the woke ideological complex, as I would call it in a scientific paper if I were to write one, where everything's turned into an identity, and anything you do to make an identity less weak or less strong, less unique, rather, is seen as actively antagonistic and wrong. So in this case, if you're giving an autistic kid or an autistic adult the help they need to be a functioning member of society, they're going to end up seeming less autistic. So that's seen as a bad thing, which is insane, to be frank. So you have the situation where you have a lot of so-called therapists where all they do is kind of listen to their client talk and then say, yes, you're right. You should be proud of who you are, and all these different sorts of things. And that's really not helpful when you're a very dysfunctional human being, as I once was, and as many young autistic people are.
So I have an idea, because I see how this lights a fire in you, and it lights a fire in me too. I'm thinking about how the majority of the people saying these things are not only encouraging people to remain disabled, but they're not the ones paying the price for that. They're not the parents who will be taking care of these disabled young adults for the rest of their lives. Um, they're really shirking the burden, and I think insulting the reality of the struggle that this presents for so many families. And then we have a conversation with someone like you, who I don't think anyone is going to clock you as autistic based on a conversation like this.
There are
right?
some people. If you know what you're looking for,
Well,
but
I mean, by the same measure, I could also be clocked as autistic, because I'm also quirky and high IQ, and I love to, go
sure.
talk
Yeah.
about my special interests. But I'm high functioning, you're high functioning. Like, there's nobody's going to listen to a conversation with you and think, oh, yeah, here's someone who's going to face significant barriers based on how different his brain is.
Yeah.
He's going to really struggle in life. No, like, one of the first things I said to you when we met today was like, you're going to make it, like, you're going to be okay. Um, and, and so, to spite these folks, with their oppressive beliefs that want to keep people disabled rather than giving them the skills to thrive, I say we focus the rest of our conversation on identifying tools like Match Plus One, for example,
Okay.
that can actually benefit some of these teens. So why don't we take a break, and when we come back, we'll go through what our advice is between you and me for parents of high functioning autistic quirky teens. What do you think?
Totally. Sounds good
Okay.
to me.
Many of you listening to this show are concerned about an adolescent or young adult you care about who's caught up in the gender insanity and therefore at risk of medical self-destruction. I developed ROGD Repair as a resource for parents just like you. It's a self-paced online course and community that will teach you the psychology concept and communication tools the families I've consulted with have found most helpful in understanding and getting through to their children, even when they're adults. Visit rogdrepair.com to learn more about the program and use promo code SOMETherapist2025 at checkout to take 50% off your first month. That's rogdrepair.com. So you had described this concept of match plus one, which really responds to the autistic person's need for structured frameworks broken down in ways that their logical mind can understand. It's been my personal and professional experience that when people have high functioning autism, or what used to be called Asperger's, that they often benefit from and crave these frameworks and can actually become very skilled at psychology and understanding social behavior when they make a conscious decision to study these things and find these frameworks and apply them. So I like the match plus one because it's something that you can remember, and it's like, oh, okay, so I mirror and then I add something, and then I see if they're going to mirror me, or yeah, it's like almost like a decision tree that they can follow. And I think you also made the connection that one reason that a lot of these kids with autistic traits are drawn into trans ideology is because it gives them some of that same structure. It gives them a language for describing why they're suffering, right? You talked about feeling good or feeling bad. And so that gets put into the language of I'm experiencing gender dysphoria and I want to experience euphoria. We know that because of these kids' alexithymia, which you named, that every experience they have can get fed into this obsessive compulsive thought loop of it means I'm trans, down to I have a stomach ache, it must be because I'm trans. So everything gets rationalized this way and it gives them this structure. Another way that I explain this to parents, and this isn't just for parents of autistic kids, is I'll say to the moms, hey, you remember those teen girl magazines that we read when we were growing up? Back before the internet, we had Teen and 17 and these magazines, and they had these quizzes that were basically like pop psychology, fad junk science. But as a teen girl, you love this stuff that's like, what color is your aura? Or, what color clothing should you wear based on your astrology sign? Or, made up like personality test stuff, right? And teen girls love this stuff.
Now we have BuzzFeed quizzes.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So for the younger for the younger folks out there, but since most of my clients are in their 50s and 60s,
Yeah.
I talk about the teen girl magazines and I say, you remember how we loved that stuff as young girls, not because it's, genuinely fascinating psychological literature, but because when adolescents are in this stage of developing all these social and emotional capacities, their brains are growing so rapidly, it's nice to have some kind of framework to latch onto, a way to define yourself, and a way to connect to other people and to understand other people. So, with that being said, it's then helpful to recognize what these people really need and fulfill some of those needs outside of gender ideology. And I think the trap for parents is that sometimes parents can also be very literal, right? So the kid gets caught in their cycle of everything means I'm actually a boy or everything means I'm actually a girl. And then the parents argue with that and it turns into a polarizing fight. No, you're not, right? Or I want to do this. No, you're not going to do that. Rather than getting at the symbolic meaning of things, which is why I think Sasha Ayad's new YouTube channel, the title is brilliant, right? The metaphor of gender. So she's teaching people to think more symbolically. So I want to, on that note, introduce something that I taught a parent recently when it comes to frameworks like match plus one. Because I found myself explaining to the mom of a girl who doesn't have an autism diagnosis, but certainly seems that way based on the behavior that's been described to me. I explained what happens when your kid is ruminating. And I showed this animation that I will try to link in the show notes if I make a reminder to myself right now. I'm promising to do that. It's a tweet by Nicholas Fabiano, MD, that shows the idea of mental health energy landscapes. I don't know if this rings a bell for you, Simon, but it shows these three-dimensional landscapes of the mind, and it shows normal as having these peaks and valleys. Schizophrenia is more flattened, and OCD has deeper pits. And then it shows a ball rolling around. So my understanding of this graphic is that the ball shows your mind's ability to move around, whether it's, your conscious thoughts moving from one thing to another, but also sort of default mode network. And that for normal people, we can sort of stay in a certain area of focus for a while, but then we can also shift out of it. Someone with schizophrenia, with the flattened peaks and valleys, their mind is all over the place and it's connecting dots that aren't actually connected. So the word salad, the free associations, the this means that of schizophrenia on the one end, obsessive compulsive disorder being on the other end, has these deep pits. And I think of that as a mind cannot get out of a stuck place. And so a lot of these kids, they have these OCD type patterns of rumination as well. So I was talking to this mom about her daughter who ruminates. and I showed her this image. And I explained, for you as a neurotypical person, when you're having a difficult experience, you had a hard day at work or something like that, maybe you vent a little to your husband, your best friend, your sister, and then you get some empathy, a hug, some problem solving, and then you come out of it. But if you imagine that your daughter's brain has those deep pits, you can't give her that same level of attention that she's giving you, or excuse me, that you would need if you were in that place, because she'll just keep ruminating. And so the experience that the mom is having here is feeling like, what do I have to do? Just keep empathizing with her. Oh, that sucks, that sucks, that sucks, that sucks 20 times over, because that's no fun. And am I really teaching her anything valuable there? So I explained to the mom how to use the process of reflective listening to gradually nudge that ball out of that pit, knowing it's going to take a lot more repetition than it would take for you. In other words, you might say, oh, I had such a hard day and my boss is so this and that. And then someone says, oh, I'm sorry, that sucks. Would you like a solution? Here's a solution. Okay, boom, you're better. For her, it might be that you have to reflect it back in a slightly different way. And then she elaborates some more. And if she elaborates some more, that means you're doing something right. So then you reflect it back in a slightly different way. And she elaborates some more. And you repeat this process and you repeat this process. You repeat this process much longer than you think it takes. So the mom came back to me the next week. She's like, I did it and it worked. She's like, I'm so bad at this. I don't get this. It's really time consuming, but my daughter just kept talking. And I'm like, well, you do want her talking to you about her problems, right? Because you're her mom. I mean, it's better to talk to you than the internet, and better to talk to you than to have everything be reinforced that means you're trans. So this is a framework that I taught a parent of a somewhat spectrum-ish youth, and I just wanted to invite your feedback on that.
So 2 thoughts. I think it's important to note that all of these strategies we're going to be talking about today are useful for everybody to differing degrees. They're generally more useful for kids who are autistic, but basically every kid who grows up nowadays has social difficulties, has anxiety, has certain traits which are a little bit autistic just because of how things are now. And there are even lots of adults who find these things useful. I've talked to lots of different people and explained all these different things, and I'll talk to like a parent. I'll be like, wow, match +1, I think I might use that. So I wanted to get that. And then secondly, I think this is your strategy here. My approach is, I think, complementary when we're talking about this particular situation of rumination and these really strong expression of emotions and kind of being stuck with that. Because it's really hard to feel like really sad, for example, for like 2 days straight. Like feeling sad for an hour is a lot. Most people can't do that. Like try crying for an hour straight, try smiling for an hour straight. That's almost impossible for most people. But a lot of these kids, I mean, I've been there. I've been consistently very sad for like 2 days for all of the 24 hours. It feels awful. So yes, I think it's really important to have that door open to your kid listen to them, right? And have that conversation with them and be patient with it. And as well, one of the things that I've found particularly useful, and I advise people from, my friends to coaching clients to engage in body-based distress tolerance skills. So one of the things that, there are many different things, and these are all things I've used or use still, where I've found that, for example, it's much easier to process certain emotions when I'm running, or when I'm on a walk. And if I really want to get out of one of these ruts, taking a cold shower is actually a really great way to do that, because I believe, it activates your parasympathetic nervous system. And worst case scenario, after the cold shower, even if it doesn't work, you're a bit more awake, you're a bit cleaner, you know. That's the worst case scenario. And I think that, especially for young guys, but as well for young girls, um, it's really important to have really concrete things you can do that get you out of this, rumination and, uh, what I like to call excessive verbalization of emotion, where this is one of my criticisms with a lot of modern therapy. A lot of modern therapy boils down to, you go to talk to your therapist and you complain to them for an hour or half an hour or whatever the duration is. And your therapist says, I hear you, I understand why you feel that way. And then you have no solutions, you have no homework or anything. And then you come back and do the same thing next week. What, and again, I'm coming from a man perspective. And so this is disproportionately, I think, important for guys. It's like, and if you're working with the dad, even, or a young guy, and a lot of the young, these girls as well, who are gender dysphoric, will have kind of, in some regards, more male typical personalities, which is perfectly okay. And so might find it useful, but having something concrete to do makes such a big difference. Having concrete goals in a therapeutic setting makes such a big difference for everybody, because all of a sudden, your whoever you're working with knows that this is what I'm doing this week, number one. And then number two, you have a way to measure, efficacy, and that's useful for both the client and for the coach, or therapist, or whatever that situation is. Yeah, I had a bunch of different thoughts there.
Well, when you talk about body-based distress tolerance skills, I'm thinking how we can apply this to parents who are experiencing a lot of resistance and pushback from their kids. The kids don't want to exercise, or they don't want to do these things. And so it's one thing to come to them on your own. It's another to guide a kid towards these things. So a lot of my philosophy that informs my program for parents, ROGD repair, and my coaching work is about radical autonomy. It's that, even if your kid is a minor, it's only a matter of time before they're not.
Sure.
And you can use these top-down control measures for a short period of time, but it could make things worse. So ultimately, desistance has to be your kid's own idea. How do we approach the kids differently in a way that's most likely to facilitate that for them without feeling like it's something that you're pushing on them? And
I
so I would
100%
say
agree.
something similar about leading your kids towards healthy choices, because there's so many parents listening that are like, yeah, Simon, I would love for my kid to do what you do and go for a run or take a cold shower. But, and so I'm thinking, what do we say to them? And for one, again, there's a world of difference between your kid being drawn to something themselves and you pushing it on them. Another, I would think, is that sometimes things have to make intellectual sense in a particular way, especially if you're dealing with one of these very intellectual autistic kids, to for them to understand the rationale, like the
Yep.
brain science behind why these things work. And, we could talk about, for instance, why a cold shower works in terms of its effect on dopamine and norepinephrine and,
Yep.
the default mode network of the brain. I think some of that is key, but I'm wondering if you have any other advice for the people who, are trying to lead the horse to water, so to speak.
Absolutely. So there are a bunch of different ways to do it. But generally speaking, and I do this with myself like every day, right? We have these big goals. And what we call big goals are kind of subjective. For some people, the big goal might be taking a shower. I've been there. I get it. It look, it's a very different perspective. So in that situation, what you do is you got to take the smallest possible step that even somebody as miserable as you can take. So for example, like if you're talking to your kid and you want your kid to try to engage in some sort of body-based emotional coping strategies, it's like, okay, maybe maybe don't start with a cold shower. That's a lot. That's scary, especially if you haven't done it before or don't like the cold or whatever. One of the things you can do is be like, here's an ice cube. And even the act of holding the ice cube and being present with that feeling and just kind of oh, wow, there's an ice cube in my hand, that will do something. Sometimes, you can do like an orange or a clementine in the freezer, things like that. Whatever, like just exposure to cold things really helps. And of course, we could get into the science on that. And depending on the kid, they need to know that or they don't need to know that. And then another thing is, okay, you want to get your kid to do this. And of course, parents know their kids best. And some kids, what they need is they need their parents to model the behavior. And I think a lot of younger kids, that's what they're looking for. So if they're, if even like a 10, 11 middle school age kid sees their mom going through a hard time and the mom pulls an orange out of the freezer and sees that the mom is better, the kid might be like, why are you holding a frozen orange? And the mom says, well, it makes me feel better. And the kid might try it just for that reason. So there are lots of kind of different ways of attack. If you have a very intellectual kid, send them like a paper about cold showers. If you send me if you send me a scientific paper about the benefit of a thing I could go do, I'm way more likely to do it than not. And like even try it. Whereas some kids, they need it to be modeled. Some kids need to be kind of just like it, right? There's modeling, there's the intellectual argument, and then I feel like there's a third thing that I'm forgetting about. But yeah, it's just overall try to take this big scary thing and make it easier. If you're not ready to go on a run, go on a walk. If you're not ready to go on a walk, put on your shoes. And sometimes I'm like, I really don't want to go on a run. And I'm like, okay, if I really don't want to go on a run, then I can put on my shoes and I'll still not want to go on a run. And almost all of the time when I put on my shoes in those circumstances, I end up going on the run because I'm like, well, I already put my shoes on. It's not that bad. And so it's just like you really need to break those things down. A lot of these kids are depressed. And when you're depressed, it's so hard to really cajole the dopamine to do anything, and doing anything that is seen as kind of a normal level of functioning is scary and difficult and seems impossible. So you really need to break things down.
Yeah, I'm curious about your rationale for cold exposure because I think of each of these things as almost separate categories. I think of a cold shower in terms of dopamine, norepinephrine. Holding a cold thing, I think of more as like a self-harm prevention tool that I know therapists sometimes teach teenagers that if you're having the urge to cut or something like that, it's um, that the desire to do some sort of self-harm can often be um, a way of taking the emotional distress one is feeling and putting it into the body or having some kind of physical outlet for that. It can also be a reaction to feeling dissociated. And then there's also the sort of chemical high that one gets from inducing pain because when we induce pain, the pleasure response comes, our endorphins come to soothe that pain. And so I think of something like holding an ice cube as activating those same pain and pleasure receptors without any actual damage to the body. And then I'm thinking of like cool sensations on certain parts of the body, like the face, for instance, can activate, they can stimulate the vagus nerve. So I'm curious, when you talk about an orange in the freezer, I've never heard of that particular one. What's the rationale for that one?
So I want to give you what might be kind of an unsatisfying answer,
Okay.
but I'll try to kind of expound appropriately. I think kind of breaking down all of the different biomechanical or neurobiological pathways, rather, of the different approaches is kind of losing the forest for the trees.
Okay.
Because I think in this situation, even if you have a kid who's super duper scientifically minded, super duper intellectual, actually what that kid needs is not more intellectualization of things, but rather the experiences that allow them to embodied experiences is what they need, right? They're going to need to feel an emotion. They're going to need to know how to cope with that emotion, and they need to feel what it's like to do that. They need to feel how it feels when they make a mistake. They need to feel how it feels when they're in love. They need to feel how it, right? They can think about how all of the things going on, but I, as somebody who used to really ignore my sort of internal sensory and mental landscape to a great degree, aside from the intellectual side of things, what a lot of kids don't realize is that the internal world, if you really explore it, is just as rich and interesting as the external world. And with all of these different body-based strategies, the main thing for me is, and especially if you're gender dysphoric, uh, these kids are disconnected from their bodies in some way to some level. And holding an orange in your hand, that connects you to your body. Taking a cold shower, that connects you to your body. Going on a walk, that connects you to your body. Going on a run, that connects you to your body. Doing jumping jacks. Um, going in a hot tub, like going out and living life with your body physically in the real world is what they need. And when you're feeling emotions, you don't feel emotions in your brain, you feel emotions in your body. And so, and this is maybe where I might lose some people, but I'm very fascinated by ancient Vedic texts from India, and they have a very different approach to understanding uh, human psychology and human physical health than a lot of sort of Western modern scientific perspectives. And I'm kind of going to be smushing a bunch of different things together, so I don't want to be claiming to be an authority on any of this, but kind of what I've come away with is, you have this whole idea of it's going to sound like so new age and stupid, but you do have this idea of chakras where there are specific places in the body. I'm not going to like talk about like enlightenment or kundalini yoga or anything like that, but what I am going to talk about is they have all these diagrams where they got a bunch of monks to sit in a cave together and meditate and feel different things and explore different parts of their minds, and then they all came together to talk about it and be like, okay, how can we explain this to other people? How can we write this down? And they have all of these diagrams of what things feel like, what the subjective experience of reality is like, and how to approach it, which is a thing that modern science is really, really bad at describing and exploring, because it's all sort of qualitative data, and you can't calculate with qualitative data that well. And so when we're talking about these kids who are disconnected from their body, who are super intellectual, they're looking for something they can do a p-value calculation with, or a chi-squared test or something like that, but they're looking in exactly the wrong place. Where they should be looking is in the embodied experiences that they have and could have. And once you add, relationships in the mix, that adds, more potential learning. That was a very long-winded explanation, but I hope that answered your question.
I'm hearing that it needs to be sensory as opposed to the navel gazing that these kids are so prone to, because the intellectual, dissociated, disembodied self-rumination is oftentimes part of the problem. But I think one of the benefits of cold is that it kind of shocks you, it wakes you up. And another thing I was thinking about in that category, speaking of yogic stuff, is Shakti mats. Do you know those? I'm
Yeah,
not
they're
sure if that's the right.
like spiky and stuff.
Yeah, there are these mats you can buy. We have one. I should use it more often. It has these little plastic, like 2000 spikes, and you just lay on it, and it's really uncomfortable, but it's not damaging. It's not breaking the skin. It's not causing you to bleed. But that sensation of pain, it stimulates blood flow and endorphins. So what I'm hearing is a common thread in a lot of what you're describing is having a new present moment experience of
Yes.
sensation in the body.
Yeah. And in terms of these sensations, yes, I am encouraging these kids to look inwards, and people are going to hear that and they're going to be, well, my kid's already ruminating all the time. Why should I encourage them to look inwards more? But when I say this, right, from an outside observer's perspective, you're not really going to be seeing this person's subjective experience. But if you think for a moment, and we all will kind of understand what I'm talking about here, think about how you are kind of normally. Like where you feel like your mind is in your head, right? Now, if you get super focused on a task, let's say you're writing an essay or you're producing music or you're playing like baseball or watching a TV show, all of a sudden your mind, like if you're watching a TV show, this is a great example. All of a sudden, all of the things around the screen disappear. You're not going to notice them anymore. And your mind is like in the screen, basically. That's kind of what it feels like subjectively. Now, what it feels like to be ruminating is your mind has almost gone back. And so it almost feels like your mind has separated from your body. That's what it feels like. And like, I'm not claiming, I'm not making a reality claim here. I'm just describing how it feels. And when you feel like your mind is separated from your body, whichever direction that is, that means that you're going to be disconnected from a lot of your emotions because your emotions happen in the body. But yeah, I'm very fascinated by these subjective experiences. And I have found that when you take the time, one of the things that has been the most healing for me is taking the time to really investigate these subjective experiences of my body and mind in concert. And that's really the only, I think that's necessary to become a whole and complete human being and heal from trauma, especially because, if there's one thing that will separate your mind from your body, it will be physical abuse and sexual assaults. Because what being bullied physically and what being sexually assaulted tells your body is your body is not safe anymore. And so you're going to want to either be dissociated from your body or you're going to want to be focusing on something else.
Are you a therapist in need of continuing education that's not over-the-top woke? Check out my colleague Lisa Mustard's pod courses. All of her pod courses are approved by the National Board for Certified Counselors. Right now, Lisa is offering my listeners an incredible deal. Get all 27 pod courses for only $44. That could meet almost all of your continuing education needs for the year. Visit lisamustard.com/podcourses and use code SOMETherapist to take $5 off of her $49 pod course bundle. Again, use code SOMETherapist at lisamustard.com/podcourses. I'll include that link and coupon in the show notes for your convenience. All right, now back to the show. And let me play devil's advocate for the young people in a dissociated state without trauma. I don't know if devil's advocate is the right word here, but I'd like to make the case that being present in one's body isn't the default state. It's a process that has to unfold. It needs to be supported by experiences. And so earlier you were saying that a lot of young people these days are a little autistic because of the social isolation of the pandemic, combined with spending so much time on screens. So it's partly about what's happening when the world is reduced to the two-dimension asynchronous communication of the screen, but it's also the opportunity cost. What experiences are they not having? And if you think about how rapidly a person is transforming during puberty, um, a lot of times when I am interviewing a parent for their kid's history, a lot of the positive experiences they're describing of things their kid once loved to do are all from before puberty. And so the question remains, since they have achieved the state of being in a body that has achieved adult sexual maturity, have they had experiences in this body, the way it is now, that taught them to love this body, right? That and to enjoy all the things that this body is capable of doing. Because if your kid loved gymnastics or skiing or whatever it was when they were 8, that's nice, that's great, but that felt like a different body ago, you know?
Yeah, literally. 100%. I mean, I wanted to kind of think of a thought experiment here, and it's like, if you have I was staying with some friends recently, and they have a like a 2-year-old, um, and this is a weird thing to think, but I'm like, I wonder what it's like to be this 2-year-old. Does this 2-year-old dissociate? Does this 2-year-old get really focused on things, or is this 2-year-old's experience rooted in their body? And I think that if you kind of observe the behavior of very young children and babies, that they start out actually being very much like all of the emotions they feel are directly related to their bodily sensations, and like, I just pooped my diaper, or I'm hungry, or I'm tired, right? That's all there is. They don't really, for the first like year, or I don't really quite remember the development of eyesight, but for a while, babies can't really see more than a couple of feet away. And so at some point, yeah, I would point at puberty as that you kind of lose that for a moment. And I remember when I went through puberty, that was quite hard. And the thing that hit me the hardest was, I really liked to sing before puberty. And I was prepping for an audition for a musical. And all of a sudden, my voice started changing on me. And now I can't sing the song like I used to. And I'm freaking out. I'm like, what the heck? And I've since gotten, back into singing, of course. But that was really, really hard for me. And I think that, I do hear from a lot of parents as well, and a lot of people and adults even, that, yeah, they're like, before puberty, I was really into this thing. And after puberty, I never really found anything, or maybe they got into a different thing. And I think that when you have a kid who's going through gender dysphoria, they're looking for that thing. They haven't found a way to rebuild that relationship with their body. And you can be kind of stuck in that place of never having rebuilt that relationship with this new body, or built this relationship with this new body, more appropriately labeled, one could say, until into their 20s. And the question is, how do you rebuild that relationship? And again, I point at the holding the orange, taking a cold shower, going for a walk, using the body to do things. And then another related thing is, I used to be very fixated on how my body looked, because I was gender dysphoric, and I look in the mirror and like, I don't like what I see. And eventually I started kind of shifting towards my relationship with my body that was less about how my body looks, to what does my body do, like, and how well does it do that, right? Instead of being like, oh, I look kind of like a woman in this one particular place in my body, I could be, well, I can lift this thing which is very heavy, or I can run this far. And I think that's a much healthier place to be with a body.
Well said.
Thank you.
And I think over time, those experiences of feeling capable and confident in one's body ideally help round out that person's comfort in carrying themselves. Because what all of these young people are ultimately seeking, and what is essentially the developmental task of anyone at that age, is to come into your full, what I've heard described as your adult main personality. To have that embodied sense of self and a coherent way of presenting yourself to the world that is flexible but also solid, right? Because we need to have a cohesive sense of self and not just feel like we become a different person depending on the room that we're in, but also that our personality can adjust to the
Yep.
company that we keep. And all of that it's easier said than done. I mean, it's a complex process that takes years and it takes experiences to shape it. And in the gender critical scene, I'm sure you've heard all the different sentiments on a range of issues, ranging from the radical feminists to the conservative Christians. And there are some extreme views in any particular camp, right? And one of them is that one thing I would consider an extreme view, and I don't know if you do, is that how you look doesn't matter. And I think for most people, if we're honest, it does matter
Yes.
to us how we carry and present ourselves. And we also notice, if we're paying attention, that the way other people carry and present themselves affects our perception of them. And so I think
Yes.
a lot of these young people who are experimenting with identity, it's not necessarily a comforting message because it's not going to resonate with the truth. But it's daunting, right? It's daunting to let go of the fantasy of omnipotent control that, oh, I can just declare my pronouns, declare how I want to be seen, and I'll be able to control how people perceive me, right? To let go of that and come into, it's on me to kind of present myself in a way that I feel good about and that people are going to like, but it also feels authentic to me. That's such a huge task.
Whenever you have a huge task, and this is kind of a theme with me, I've said this same thing multiple times, but if there is one thing you're going to take away from this conversation, this should be it. Because a lot of people don't have a lot of people have not experienced the absolute depths of year upon year major depressive chapters of life. And that's where a lot of understanding and empathy breaks down between kids and parents, because in fact depression is far more common in this generation, and I do not think that it's just because we're diagnosing it more. Is whenever you have a big challenge, a big task, you break it down. What are the fundamentals? And the fundamentals of presenting yourself in the world is, okay, make sure your hygiene is good. Take a shower. Like, you could feel terrible about your body, but like if you're stinky and there's some dirt on your knee and if you're like a little bit sweaty and it's like dried, you feel kind of weird. Like, I really hate that feeling. Like, if you take a shower, you're going to feel a bit better. You're going to be like, wow, I feel better. Right? You haven't solved it completely, but worst case scenario, you're clean and you took a shower. And then it's like we have a whole yes, we have a tradition, and tradition is not always completely useful for people, but dressing well, right? Okay, you wear a button down shirt, maybe some long pants if you're a guy or a girl. I mean, either works. And wear something that is, in your culture, considered appropriate and a little bit dressed up than perhaps your average Joe. And you'll notice that people treat you differently. And that will make you feel good, and people will treat you better. And that's super simple, and it could feel inauthentic at the end of the day, but at least you know that, hey, you can do something that's real and concrete and maintainable, where you can kind of have that, have what you're kind of looking for at the end of the day. And then the third thing rather, is health. Is people like healthy people. And people aren't aware of this, but there are all of these subconscious signals that we pick up in each other, whether that's in face shape and symmetry and body fat distribution and hair and basically all of the things we find attractive in people are signals of physical and genetic health. And you can make those signals more prominent, again, with hygiene, and also with things like exercise and eating well. You could eat the same amount of calories, and if you ate, whole foods, you would look better than if you ate the same amount of calories with completely super processed foods. And there are many different directions to go, but oftentimes you'll find that if you take a little step, you'll see a little bit of improvement, and if you take the next step, you'll see some more improvement, and then it snowballs.
It sounds self-evident, but I can imagine the queer theorists protesting against the perceived oppression of these facts of reality, right? That we find signs of fertility attractive, and that there are certain ways of grooming and presenting yourself that are considered more appropriate than others. And I think, if I'm going to name queer theory, it's the point of queer theory is to dismantle everything healthy in society. So it's, we don't bow to them here, but I just feel for these kids that are caught up in really self-defeating belief systems, because deep down we do care what other people think of us. We do want others to like us, and we strive for some kind of coherence. We want to make sense to ourselves and make sense to other people. We want to be effective at getting what we want from other people. And so subscribing to queer theory and deliberately undermining one's not only signs of fertility, but literal fertility, as in the case of, sterilizing so-called gender affirming care. It's all very self-defeating, and it's just sad that many of these kids won't come to just kind of accept these facets of reality until it's too late.
And yeah, I guess I have two more things on that. Is, if you're a young guy and you want to wear a dress, it's better to be a well-groomed, healthy young guy who's wearing a dress than a poorly groomed, unhealthy guy who's wearing a dress. Number one. And find somebody who will argue the other side completely genuinely, who you would want to share a meal with, and maybe I'll take it back. That's a pretty tall order. Secondly, is one of the reasons this, I think, impacts autistic kids disproportionately is because autistic kids have trouble with theory of mind. And theory of mind and empathy are very similar, but theory of mind is this idea that other people have their own minds and experiences and preferences, and everybody isn't just like a copy paste version of you in a different situation and different clothes and body, right? And I think that a lot of autistic kids, when they hear empathy, they think, oh, empathy is when people feel what other people are feeling, but I don't do that, so I must not have empathy. In reality, that's a very simplified version of empathy. Empathy, I believe, is being able to understand and know on a deep level, or on any level really, what it's actually like to be another person. And one of the issues with queer theory is this thing called standpoint epistemology. It's this idea where there are certain categories of knowledge only accessible to people of oppressed classes. So it basically, I can never understand what it's like to be a Black person in a useful way. That's what's basing your worldview on standpoint epistemology means. So that prevents the development of empathy across difference. So if you're stuck in that and everything's captured by that, and you're already having issues with empathy, you're not going to understand that when you're a guy and you wear a dress and say your pronouns are she, her, you're not going to understand that other people are still going to see you as a man, even if they, kowtow to the ideology. And that the reason they're treating you, quote unquote, as if you were a woman isn't because they see you as a woman, but because either they truly believe in the ideology or they are afraid for the repercussions. It's fundamentally a coercive situation, and I am not a big believer in coercing other people to see you a particular way, because you can't do that.
When you describe standpoint epistemology, I think another real danger of that belief system is that, at least I think I've yet to encounter anyone who thinks that way that doesn't also think that it's very obvious to them that had they been present at any other point in history, they would have obviously been on the right side of history. That is a belief that they hold. And to me, that really points to a lack of theory of mind, of not being interested in understanding how people who view themselves as good can commit atrocities. For me, that's really important. Like such an important part of my participation as a human being on this planet, is to understand how people who view themselves as good can do terrible things, and that I am human in the same way. That's where the understanding of sin is valid. That's where the understanding of the Solzhenitsyn quote about the little line between good and evil running through the heart of every man. Um, and so it seems like the very same people who would say that you cannot possibly understand what it's like to be Black, for example, and that obviously I can't by the same logic, would also not have you put yourself in the shoes of the bad guys either, so to speak. So it's a real kind of lack of theory of mind across the board that I think results in tremendous hubris and folly.
Yeah, and this is shocking. So one of my favorite things to do is to go out literally on the street sometimes and talk to people who disagree with me.
I love that.
Now, I've had a lot of conversations where the goal of my conversations now are not to convince the other person of my point of view. I'm the most of the time that's kind of out of the picture. Instead, my goal is, can I get this person to understand that people they disagree with believe things for reasons that aren't one of the throwaway reasons like racism or transphobia or something, right? And so I'll ask somebody, in certain cultures, they see being homosexuality is wrong, and they kill gay people for being gay. Can you understand how, if you took somebody from that culture and put them here, how they would then think that killing gay people is right, because they think that God doesn't, condone, homosexuality, for example. And they will say, well, I think killing people is bad. Like they don't understand that this other person thinks a different thing than them for a reason. And like they so or you might ask them, okay, put yourself in my shoes. I personally I had this conversation with somebody recently about around the Charlie Kirk thing about abortion. So I asked somebody sent me a clip and was like, Charlie Kirk's evil because he said this thing. And this is a very crazy thing for a guy to say, but it was something along the lines of, if his like 8 or 9-year-old daughter got pregnant after being sexually assaulted, would he want her to keep the baby? Now that's a very hard question to ask somebody. Now, I'm not saying I agree or disagree with Charlie Kirk's response, but he said he would want his daughter to keep the baby. Now, the person I was talking to was like, oh, he's evil and awful and all of these things because he responded that way. And now I don't agree or disagree. I haven't really made my mind up about that. But what I'm more interested in is why he would say that. And I asked the person I was talking to, okay, if you thought that human embryos starting at fertility had the same moral weight as a fully grown human, what would you say? And the person I was talking to was completely unable to think about that. And it's wild to me that there are so many fully grown adults in this world who can't do something like that. And that's where a lot of political conversations break down, is a lack of empathy and a lack of theory of mind.
Well, I think it's so great that you're getting out there and asking people these questions in public settings. What kind of settings are you going to, like universities or?
So lately it's been a lot of, like 2 settings mainly. Protests that I do. So I protested Pride, I protested the Endocrine Society, and then legislative hearings. So I'll go and testify for or against a bill, and I talk to people and on the other side of the issue, and they say, this is my point of view, and I'll say to them, I understand why you think what you think. I listened to your testimony, and if I thought that my daughter was really better off undergoing this care, that she would kill herself if she didn't, I would be doing the same thing that you're doing right now. And they're always taken aback by that. They're not used to somebody saying, like, telling them that if I were in your shoes and believed what you believed, I would do the same thing. And here's an explanation of what you believe that's pretty accurate to what you believe. People aren't used to this on either side. And then, I try to get them to understand why I believe what I believe, and sometimes I'm effective in that. And sometimes people change their minds.
That's really great. And I hope people are taking notes who want to be more effective communicators, because you're starting with agreement. And that's what Charlie Kirk did. He would try to get people to clarify their position first and then look for where they agree, or where he, and I teach parents this all the time, right? Like, because you're so many times they're in polarized positions with their kids during an adolescent power struggle for autonomy. So I say, hey, whenever they say something where you can say, you're right, or I agree, even if it's just to 10% of what they're saying, lead with that.
100%. And there's this breakdown that happens between the kid and the adult, and the parent. And the parent will say, well, the kid believes that because they're immature and a kid. That's not a good explanation. That might be like several layers down, but the kid's not going to feel heard or want to continue talking to you if that's what you believe and that's how you act and that's what you say to them. The same thing happens the other way around, where the kid will say, well, this is my dad. He doesn't know what I'm going through. And it's never, that's not a good explanation again. It's like, maybe that's, several layers deep down, but your dad believes things for reasons. The kid believes things for reasons. And understanding those reasons and believing those things, worst case scenario, you agree to disagree and you have a better relationship because of it.
Well, I feel like we could talk all day, but that seems like as good a place as any to wrap things up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
All right. So Simon, where can people find you?
People can find me on X, Instagram, or YouTube at Simon Amaya Price. I also have a website, and it's simonamayaprice.com.
All right. So at Simon Amaya Price on X, Instagram, and YouTube, and simonamayaprice.com. That's pretty straightforward. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thank you for listening to You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist. If you enjoyed this episode, kindly take a moment to rate, review, share, or comment on it using your platform of choice. And of course, please remember, podcasts are not therapy, and I'm not your therapist. Special thanks to Joey Pecoraro for this awesome theme song, Half Awake, and to Pods by Nick for production. For help navigating the impact of the gender craze on your family, be sure to check out my program for parents, ROGD Repair. Any resource you heard mentioned on this show, plus how to get in touch with me, can all be found in the notes and links below. Rain or shine, I hope you will step outside to breathe the air today. In the words of Max Ehrmann, with all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world.